KONTOUR has a large number of very refined and musical modulation possibilities. In this video, we will look at how KONTOUR's modulation works, so that you can either create your own or simply modify the modulation in the factory sounds. We'll also take a look at the motion recorders, which are a unique and engaging way to create dynamics with KONTOUR's macro controls. Let's look at a few examples of modulated sounds in KONTOUR. And here's a haunting soundscape. And here's a kind of a vocal bass sound. The motion and dynamics of these sounds result from a clever use of the modulation possibilities in KONTOUR. There are 12 modulation sources in KONTOUR. First of all, the 4 macro controllers at the top, and then the 5 mod assignments. They come from your MIDI controller. And then the 3 envelopes. KONTOUR's interface very cleverly hides the modulation assignments when you don't need them. If you want to see what's going on and what you can assign what to, you can just click on, for example, the little plus of the drama, and you can see in green here all the target parameters that are possible. Same with the other macro controllers here. You can also click on the mod assignment here and see the same modulation target possibilities. The same goes for the envelopes, where you have the different targets. Assigning modulation is very easy. Let's say I want to assign the color to the target self-modulation of the oscillator A. I just click and drag, and I'll see the amount of modulation right here. And of course, if I move the knob, I'll have a different range here. If I click and drag down, I get opposite or reverse modulation, so to speak. I just reverse the polarity of my modulation. What's also important is when I click and hold, I can see the percentage of modulation in this case in my display. And as I move, I can see that change as well. If I want to get rid of modulation, I just double click. Again, click and drag, there it is. And I'll click on the plus here. And even though the modulation targets are hidden, you can still see with this little purple line that we have modulation on this particular parameter. As an example of seeing the modulation assignments in a sound, let's look at this preset, cupola. You can see there's modulation on the phase modulation coming in from oscillator B to A. You can see a lot of other parameters being modulated as well. And the colored modulation, we can simply click here and see exactly where these are assignable or assigned. So you can see, for example, that there's a lot of envelope B modulating the self-modulation, the phase modulation of oscillator B. The 4 macro controls have names that reflect the kind of effect they have on the sound. Drama, for example, with its 11 targets, affects distortion and feedback, the amount of flanger, echo, reverb, and so on. Color 1 has more to do with spectrum, so you can see that you can assign it to cutoff, phase modulation of both oscillators, the all-pass tune, and so on. Color 2 has a lot to do with intensity or character of the sound. Finally, there's loudness with 9 targets, and it has a lot to do with the internal levels of the sound engine. For example, the mix levels and shaper, cabinet, and so on. You can see that the macro controls have a sort of overreaching effect on parameters of the same roughly the same category, and they're really made to be assigned to things like foot pedals or automation in your DAW. The mod assignment modulation sources come from your MIDI keyboard. Let's look at these briefly. With velocity, you can see our targets here. We have mostly things having to do with the envelopes, and that sort of makes musical sense. If we turn up the attack time here, and I'll put up the modulation from the velocity. So this time when I play quietly, the attack time is relatively slow, but when I play loud or hard, it's fast. I'll put up some self-modulation here. There, it's very soft. So when I play hard or fast, high velocity, then you can hear a much faster attack. So that's very useful. The key tracking is very common for using, for example, in cutoff, decay time, and so on. And here's the pitch bend, which is already assigned right here. But we can move that up, for example, so it goes very high. And of course, if you want to remove that, just double-click like any modulation in KONTOUR. The pitch bend, by the way, also is able to be assigned to cutoff and the tuning of the comb filter and the all-pass tune. The mod wheel is assignable to one of the 4 macro controls. So that can be very useful as well when you want to control one particular macro control right here. Finally, aftertouch is something that not all MIDI keyboards have. But once you play a note, you can actually push a little bit harder and get some extra modulation. So let's assign that to see what happens. So I'll put it on drama right here. So when I play the key and push a little bit harder, I can control just by pushing down my key. I can control the amount here. So this is very useful for creating a little bit more brightness in this case, or color. I'll use the color and I'll assign my control here. And I'll assign my color, for example, just like I did before, to the self-modulation. And there, by pushing the key, I get the effect. Finally, let's look at the envelopes. Envelope A and B control oscillator and shaper A and B and are identical. They're both 6-stage envelopes with 2 decay stages and a breakpoint in between, and this is very useful for building percussive sounds and for having a lot of control over the shape of the envelope. What I didn't mention before is that the amount of envelope can be adjusted by going into velocity here, and this is the amount that the keyboard velocity affects my envelope. So this is 100%, so however hard or soft I play, it corresponds to the full range, the full MIDI range. But if I take this down to 0, no matter what I play, it'll be the same loudness. And you assign the envelopes the same way as the other modulation sources by just, well, unclick the velocity here, by clicking right here. And there you can see the sources of envelope A, which affect basically the oscillator shaper A, including the phase modulation going into A from oscillator B, and exactly the inverse when I click on envelope B. And as its name implies, the pitch envelope controls the various pitch parameters of KONTOUR. So if you just click here and see the targets, we have right here, for example, oscillator A. Let's just crank this up, crank this down somewhere around here. And we can have a typical kick drum sort of sound because of that very rapid pitch envelope. And of course, we can control this here with a decay release phase and our attack phase as well. One of the more salient features of KONTOUR are the motion recorders. To get to them, you just click on the A to go into the A view. And before we do, let's look at what they're actually doing, what's going on here. You can see the 4 macro controls here, which are exactly the same as the 4 here. So there's the sound, the basic sound. And if we move this, you can see some other controls moving here. We get a lot more spectral content. as we move the Color 1 macro controller. We can of course do the same thing if we go into the A view and move it there. But what's interesting is that we can record what we're playing. And to do that, I have two possibilities, either by moving the knob or by using my mouse. Let's try the mouse method. I'll record arm my motion recorder by clicking here. And then I just click here in this area with my mouse and move my mouse up and down according to what kind of motion I want. And I have my recording. I'll undo my record arm and then play it back. And now I have a sound here, which is being modulated. And you can see the modulation happening here. You'll notice as soon as I hit the record, or the playback, I should say, I don't have this knob possibility anymore, which makes sense. It means that the motion recorder is taking over the movement here. Furthermore, there's a smoothing parameter, which lets me even out the control path I just drew. And by increasing smooth, it makes it a lot more, well, less jagged edges, so to speak. And I'll bring this down. I also have swing, which is kind of like a resonance. Every time it moves, it bounces around a little bit. It's interesting, if I turn this off, you can see that the bouncing is also happening when I'm using the knob. It's the same in the B view here. So if I go back here, and I want a little bit more of a swing here, you can see that there's a little bit of a lag here. It takes a little bit more time for the modulation amount to catch up with my movement. That can create some very organic, smoothing type sounds, both if you're controlling this with your MIDI controller and in your DAW, but also with your motion recorder. The other way to record into the motion recorders is to use the macro control itself. So let's look at drama. You see the yellow dot. What that means, we'll go into the B view here, is that the mod wheel is assigned to it. And you can see the little black dot there as well. And we can turn off the assignment indicator, and it's still there, visible for us. So when we move our mod wheel, it moves the drama knob as well. So let's go into the A view, and the same thing is happening. We'll record our movements, right, just by moving our mod wheel. Let's check out a few more motion recorder features. I'm going to get it going again. I have my start time right here, and this is my loop, of course, so I can actually choose what part of the wave here, or the form that I want to actually loop. And I can sync this as well to the clock, the internal reactor clock, or if I'm using Reactor KONTOUR as a plugin, it will sync to my host as well. In addition, I have the possibility of changing the scaling of this. Let's just get this out a little bit. And I can move this so the movements themselves are a lot bigger or smaller. And I can offset this as well. So this is very useful for playing with my modulation. I can even change the rate here so it's going much faster. Let's move this back up. And I can make this stand still and go backwards as well. And now we have this swing factor here, which looks like it's redrawing the line, although the original recording is still in memory. And speaking of memory, I can also copy this. So I copy this and I go into my color 2, for example, and I say paste, and there's the same wave that I just drew here, the same motion. So this is very useful as well. We can have it triggering by key here. I'm going backwards now again. Pretty cool. I can trigger it by one key, and there's a legato effect, or by multiple. So every time I play another key, even though I'm holding the other keys down, it goes back to my start position. In addition, I have the possibility of loading a preset here. So there's a lot of different forms here, for example, and you can see that even you can have a sort of a frequency change. So this really substitutes for an LFO in a big way. It actually does a lot more than an LFO can do, and it's quite flexible as well. One last thing is that you can control the amounts of your effects at the bottom of the screen. Here I have reverb, and I can turn that up right here. And the echo, of course, and all of our effects, which we'll talk about in the next video.